Hey, fam! We're trucking along here with OCD Awareness Month, which brings us to our second cornerstone of awareness, which is lived experience. So make yourself at home, fam, because Ashton's story is a gift, and I can't wait for you to hear more. I'm Nicole Morris, licensed marriage and family therapist and mental health correspondent. And let me be the first to say, welcome to the family. The OCD family, that is. I am here to create a community of support for family members, spouses, partners, parents, adult children, as there may be adult words, and chosen family of OCD sufferers and their community. I've had over 22 years of experience in the mental health field, but please note that this information does not qualify or substitute as a diagnostic evaluation, therapy, or treatment, and it is presented on an as-is basis. Please follow up with a qualified mental health provider in your area regarding concerns for yourself or loved ones. Thank you for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Okay, fam, hello. Hi there. How are we doing? I hope everyone is doing well in your different corners of the world. Today happens to be fall break for my kiddos, which is one day, folks. What day? But hey, they are enjoying some time off, and I'm happy to have some extra time with them too. Originally, I was set to have a girls' weekend with some of my tribe, but hurricane season is going strong, fam. So I wanted to extend my heartfelt thoughts, prayers, and positive vibes to anyone affected by these catastrophic storm systems in the US and beyond. And you know what, fam? We have a little bit of an extended episode today because Ashton's story is layered and full of learning, and I didn't want you to miss even a single bit of it. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce them because he's amazing, and I want you to hear from them as much as possible. So Ashton is a non-binary autistic lived experience advocate in recovery from OCD and C-PTSD. They're an early career therapist hoping to use their lived experience to help others reduce their suffering and live lives that matter to them. In their free time, he loves crocheting and engaging in their special interests outside of queer and mental health advocacy. So Ashton is really special, and he is incredibly brave to come and share their story. But I do want to take a minute here to create safety and ask for your open stance, fam. For people living in one, let alone multiple intersections, such as queer, non-binary, autistic, or anything we're talking about, especially when it comes to complex mental health disorders, there can be some stigma, maybe some lived experience, maybe some questions, maybe some misinformation. What do all of these intersections mean? So I want to tell you what they mean to me because I think it's really important to be clear. OCD affects everyone. Gender, sexuality, ethnicity, neuroprocessing, mental health, religion, or moral beliefs. Yeah, it affects everyone. And thusly, every family has some or maybe even a lot of experience with these intersections. Conversely, some won't, at least that they're aware of. But this fam, much like your families, is better together. We are a community of resources and support for everyone. We are advocates and cheerleaders for everyone. So if you're allistic and think, I don't understand the autistic experience, I don't even understand what allistic means, it's okay. There are some experiences we're going to understand, and there's some that we simply can't. We can't understand what that's like. But I would argue, in some ways, we can through listening, through opening our stances, through connecting to someone based on their experience of pain and challenges or triumphs and hopes. OCD does not discriminate, so neither will I. But also, I want to acknowledge that sometimes speaking out about one's experience can feel scary, and not only because it's vulnerable, and vulnerable things are scary, but also because not everyone accepts some of the experiences our fellow humanity experiences. We all have our own biases, we all have our own beliefs, and honestly, I don't expect to change anyone's mind in this quick few minute intro. But I do and always will prioritize that in this family, house rule number one is everyone is welcome. But that is followed by a close second that we are responsible for creating and maintaining safety here. So to Ashton, to you, listening fam, and for our own families, may we remember what unites us. May we look around and for our own families. No, we're not alone. And may we open our stances, even if or when it surpasses our understanding at times, as we say hello and welcome Ashton. Welcome back to the OCD Family Podcast. And today I'm so delighted because I have a friend. Can I call you friend, Ashton?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, we are. We're buddies now. I have a friend, Ashton Pizza, LMSW, joining us today. And so, welcome to the fam, Ashton. We're so happy to have you.
Honestly, I'm happy to be here. Like, ever since you connected with me and I was able to find the podcast through you connecting with me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like part of the fam, even being a listener. So it's awesome to be able to come on and actually talk and share my story and to be able to have this awesome conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And fam, I'm going to let you know how Ashton and I met. I actually was just talking with Ashton before we started recording. So, over the summer and somewhat recently, don't quote me on the timeline, I probably should have looked it up, but we got a new executive director. We, as if I'm like part of the IOCDF, but I'm a member of the IOCDF. The International OCD Foundation got a new executive director. And as part of her new leadership, she facilitated an organizational series of listening sessions, which I thought was fantastic. I think it's so important to have that engagement and to not only engage, but to actually
Yes.
listen, be solutions focused. So I went to all of the listening sessions because I am a nerd and that kind of fun at parties. And Ashton, I think we were in a couple of them together, but
Yeah.
even in the first one, I was telling Ashton, your energy. I was like, I am drawn to the vibe that is Ashton. And I just loved what he was asking. I loved what he was curious about. I loved his bravery in speaking because in those forums, and it was like over Zoom or whatnot, but like in those forums, it still can be a little bit intimidating sometimes to speak in that.
Oh, sure.
And so I just loved everything, everything. And I was like, Ashton, I'd immediately like private messaged him in the Zoom and I was like, can we connect? Would you like to come on the show? Please, can we get to know each other more? So, Ashton, I would love if you could tell the
Mhm.
fam a little bit, maybe even about the listening session. How did you
Yeah.
hear about those? Because as you're going to share with us today, you recently got your degree, you just
Mhm.
got your first job in terms of
Boop,
having
boop.
therapy clients and all of that. And so I love that you were like, I'm going and I'm going to vocalize what needs to be vocalized and listen and hear what needs to be heard. And so,
Literally ground running.
yes, ground running, which is so inspiring because I was telling, again, Ashton, so many people have been in the field and they're not showing up. They're not saying, oh, this could be better. This I think works really well. And he was like, I'm here and I love that. So how did you even learn about the listening sessions in the first place?
Yeah.
And then I know we will get through the story, but I'm just curious how you heard about it.
Yeah. So I basically, just to kind of like connect some dots here, I'm a social worker by profession. I was driven to social work when I was in my undergraduate program,
Mhm.
originally out of queer advocacy and wanting to raise awareness around queer advocacy. Something that I learned very early on that has stuck with me as an advocate is the organizations that we love the most, we
Mhm.
want to be the most critical of
Mhm.
because we want them to be the best that they can be. So as I went through my OCD recovery journey and we get towards like the tail end of it and I'm wanting to get back into my social work career, I was applying to jobs, but obviously that's not an instant process.
Right.
So I was able to look into the International OCD Foundation. I had put in to be a grassroots advocate.
Yeah.
And so I was able to kind of get the bug in my ear, so to speak, about the listening sessions through the advocacy emails. And I think that's like such an awesome opportunity is to be able to have the IOCBF reach out to you every month and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what you can do to help raise awareness. So that's how I was able to find myself in those listening sessions to be able to kind of voice that. So yeah.
I love that. You know what's interesting, bomb drop kind of moment for me when you were saying that the organizations we want to work the best, like we can be most critical of. And one of the things I thought of as a family therapist myself was I think probably starts with the family. You know?
Yes.
You
Oh,
know,
for
you
sure.
know? Because it's like we want, we need, and we have impacts from our family and from our
Mhm.
environment. And on a broader scale, on a more global scale, then we can look at how different organizations, different institutions, governments, etc., cultures can function. But I love that. So you are a social worker at heart. Love it.
Yeah.
Love the queer advocacy as well, because what's interesting is too, when we connected, it was around summertime, it was around Pride time, and it is a time where companies tend to already kind of shift and go, "Oh, we support Pride." And it feels like a marketing campaign often,
Yeah.
right?
Like, here's our rainbow mug,
Here
send your money here.
Yes, here you go. It's our special Pride line, and then when
Yeah.
when July 1st hits, it's like, "See ya." And I don't mean to be so blasé in terms of people's support, but it can feel like that even as an ally
Yeah.
in the community. I see that, or whether it's for our BIPOC population, another topic near and dear to our hearts for the autistic community, and so yeah.
There's a term for it, actually. It's called rainbow capitalism.
Ooh, I'm
Yes,
running.
so that whole phenomenon in June where we get, like, the pride lines and then it disappears, rainbow capitalism.
Right, because I've posted something before, and I feel this way for a lot of different intersections. If there's a month or a day, yay for your day and the other 364 days, but if there's a month and all of a sudden that messaging disappears in the other 11 months, then that
It's
that
like,
kinda tells
"Hmm,
you a little more about the stance on things. But yeah, I'm so excited to have you here, and as you have already indicated, you're a person with lived experience. Welcome to the club. So
yes."
many of us have lived experiences, and you particularly going into social work, there's actually a number of lived experience practitioners
Yes,
in the OCD and OCRD community. However, it can bring some unique challenges. It can bring some
for sure.
unique strengths to the process. And so would love to start, first of all, in terms of just understanding OCD and that you are living with this thing called OCD. I'm sure that looking back, because hindsight is always 2020, you can go, oh my
Yes,
gosh, I
absolutely.
I noticed OCD even before I knew that was OCD. But how did you come to discover that what you were experiencing, what your brain was doing, is this thing called obsessions and compulsions, and they were sticking, and it was getting to this level where it was causing distress to your life? When did you learn about you having OCD?
Yeah, so basically my whole process of getting to my OCD diagnosis. So when we talk about being like newly graduated, I finished my graduate program back in May of 2022.
Mhm.
So it's been about 2 years. And part of that was my OCD took a major downhill right after grad school.
Mhm.
And so I started to kind of look back, and there were these signs in childhood. There were different things that kind of came up. My mom is a 2 times cancer survivor, very early stage. And often what would happen in those early stages was being the oldest child of five in the household. I was often asked to take on a lot of responsibility.
Sure.
So, what sort of that manifested into was being one, having a lot of obsessions about cancer, about my mom dying,
Yeah.
about the fears around that, which are very real, but also what ends up making this more OCD is compulsive cleaning that
Mm.
is done in an unreasonable way. Because I had read an article at one point as a teenager that stress increases the likelihood of cancer coming back.
Right.
So we're cleaning for 2+ hours after school every day to try to keep mom's stress level down so that way she doesn't get cancer again.
Right.
Because we don't want mom to die. I'm a very family oriented person, someone who values family so deeply,
Yeah.
which is part of why relationship OCD has really impacted my family relationships, is because I value those relationships so much. And so as I kind of grew up, got older, moved out of the house, a lot of these cleaning behaviors stuck with me
Yeah.
because that's how my brain learned to manage distress. Was if I'm stressed, if I'm having a hard time, if I feel like something bad's going to happen, I'm going to deep clean my boyfriend's apartment from
Right.
top to bottom.
Right.
But then obviously, as we know, OCD is never satisfied. It will
No.
always move on to the next thing or make it much worse. So we kind of go through undergrad. It is a little bit out of the picture. We still have a lot of like cleaning behaviors going on, but not enough to where it's keeping me out of my life.
Yeah.
COVID hits in my last year of my undergrad program. And so that's the big thing. Lots of obsessions about, because a big theme for me is hurting people, harm,
Yeah.
and that fear of harming someone. So, the cleaning behaviors were still there, still present.
Mhm.
We're doing all of the things times 10 to
Right.
prevent from getting other people sick, as well as getting ourselves sick.
Yeah. And if I can pause you there too, because
Yeah.
what was really tricky too about that time
Mhm.
was there was a lot of fear in the community too, because there were
Mhm.
a lot of unknowns, especially when COVID
Yeah.
first hit. So the shutdown happened basically around the world. We're all like, can't leave the house. Like, that's how dangerous of a
Mm.
threat this could be.
Yes.
And so you take that societal level of threat, amplify
Mhm.
already this responsibility of, if I don't do X, Y, and Z plus, then I could risk bringing harm to somebody. And the news is sitting there going, and yes, you could bring harm to somebody. Don't go out.
Yeah.
Don't be with your people. Don't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's amplified by that relative societal doubt and some fear mongering and all the different kind of
Yeah.
tailspins that took. But yes, also the obsessional. So you can see how that would amplify that. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, for sure. No,
Keep
that's
going.
okay.
I
No,
was just
no.
thinking about it.
Because that's real. That's
Yeah.
so valid. That's so real. And so it's almost like you're getting this external messaging that like feeds into that. And I think that being someone who's also autistic, I've always been very susceptible to external messaging,
Mhm.
especially if it like goes with what OCD wants. So for
Yeah.
example, when I talked about childhood and like growing up and the cleaning behaviors and things like that, we were masking a lot of the distress
Yeah.
that sort of happened behind the scenes of those cleaning behaviors. But because it benefited my family members that I was constantly cleaning, those things were encouraged.
Right.
Those things were, you know, sort of, there was a lot of external messaging of, you need to keep doing this and you need to do it more and you need to do it better. So it's almost like feeding OCD what it wants to hear, like a weird opposite of family accommodation in a way.
Yeah.
But
It's interesting though, because I was thinking, just even as you were starting to say the external messaging, my first thought that bubbled up in my head was, oh, I want to ask him about the pressure to mask. And you were like, yeah,
yeah,
already. And for anybody who is unaware of what the term masking means, and you may have been able to contextually go, oh,
yes.
the need to kind of meet these external expectations, but would you mind sharing what that entailed for you, that expectation, even if it's the internal expectation of what you
Mhm.
needed to do to feel good enough or acceptable to these
Yeah.
external expectations?
Yeah. So masking is like a very broad term and depending on like your specific identities,
Mhm.
because masking can apply to any sort of intersectional identity.
Yeah.
But when it comes to being autistic, living with complex mental health disorders, being neurodivergent, it's a lot about what is internal, never being external,
Mhm.
not showing it in your face, not showing it in your body,
Mhm.
but doing things more internally. Like you're almost doing double the work internally to
Mhm.
not have to show it externally. You're
Mhm.
putting on a face that is not what is actually going on inside of you
Mm.
and pretending like there's something else going on. So for childhood, it was a lot of pretending that I wasn't exhausted from cleaning all the time,
Yeah.
pretending like I wasn't in a significant amount of distress, or putting on a lot of face because I needed to physically show how much I cared
Mhm.
instead of me caring being enough. So, as an autistic person, if I didn't show enough emotion that related to caring,
Mhm.
that was not acceptable. So, there's a lot of masking of like, I have to save face and do a lot of external behaviors that make it clear to someone else what I feel internally. So it's kind of like a mix of those both, where you have to like amplify your mask so that way people actually understand what's going on internally, or take your mask to the complete opposite so that they don't see the internal distress that's going on.
Right. And it's among other things that there's this idea of an expectation of, for me to think you're listening, you're considering me, you're empathetic, I don't know, fill in a blank. I would expect to see this response from you. And if
Yeah.
you're not giving that response, first of all, it doesn't mean that you're not having a response. They're just not coding that response as what they deem should be appropriate, even though it's you, it's
Yeah.
your body, it's your mind, it's your experience, right? And so
Yeah.
it becomes this very complex thing. And as you said, it can show up in so many different intersections. So many
Yeah.
people, so many of the fam here listening, if their lived experience might go, well, I do that with my OCD. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and we've even talked I was talking with Dr. Jeremy Schumann when we were talking a little more in depth about the intersection within the autistic community. He was talking about, yeah, and this is why there are so many precursors for autistic individuals. And if we start kind of looking at the phenomenology of how this shows up, yeah, because there is this need, this feeling of, especially when you're having an intrusive thought and you're worried about harm, where you're like, I gotta keep that in and I've got to kind of just
Mhm.
I've gotta do what I can do to save the situation. So I think that's really helpful. I also was thinking too about how different in different cultural communities and ethnic communities, saving face can be part of the cultural
Mhm.
community in terms of we don't sit and air this all out. We're going to save face here and we can have our feelings privately over here. And so again, it's just another great point of how it can show up in different intersections and validating that. And so you were being praised for the way you were helping contribute, not only helping out as the oldest of 5 children, you said?
Yep, 5
Okay.
in the household.
Oh my word. And how young was the youngest?
So there was, from me being the oldest to the youngest, 10-year age difference.
Okay.
So when I was 17, graduating from high school, my youngest sibling in the household was 7 years old.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the times when mom was going through like cancer and things like that, I mean, youngest was a toddler.
Yeah.
So it was, yeah, there was a lot. There's a lot there.
That is a lot. And did
Yeah.
you have a dad or another mom in the picture or a partner that your mom had also helping, or did you
Yeah.
kind of take on all of that?
So it was a situation where my parents were separated when I was super young, about when I was 4 years old. And my mom had been remarried to the same person. She's still sort of married to him. So my siblings in the household, of the 5 of us, several of them were mom and stepdad's kiddos.
Yeah.
So it was kind of this sort of blended family situation for me as a person, and especially being someone who's so like deeply attached to my siblings.
Mhm.
I don't see step siblings or half siblings. They're my
That's different. They're
siblings.
your
Those are
family.
my
Yeah,
they are my fam.
right.
Like,
They're the peeps.
I
They're
would
they're
do
the fam.
I would do anything for those kids. So there was that sort of partnership, but where my mom had all of this sort of medical stuff going on, it was really difficult for her to work. So stepdad was often working a lot
Mhm.
and outside of the house, trying to do his best there to be able to make it happen. And when we're talking about like the specifics of like maybe some of the cancers that she dealt with, we're talking breast cancer. So some of the surgery she had to go through, it was difficult to be able to clean off counters at first in that
Right.
recovery stage.
Right.
So, we did have to have a lot of stepping up and kind of helping out. It's just when you have undiagnosed, unnoticed OCD, it takes it to extreme.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if
Mhm.
I can ask, because you were mentioning
Yeah.
about your career advocacy too, in this process of being 17 years old and even younger, you said toddler age when your youngest sibling, when part of the cancer
Yeah.
journey was happening, were you also in a process of coming out?
As far as like my queer journey goes, for our listeners out there, I identify as non binary as far as gender goes. My pronouns are they, he. And I didn't start exploring my gender until I was about 18, 19 years old. But sexual orientation had been something that I had been exploring since middle school.
Mhm.
So at the whole time when I was a teenager, I was still identifying as a woman. I was still identifying with feminine pronouns, things like that. But when I refer to myself in the past, I tend to use gender neutrals. So if I say like, yeah, they as in that kiddo, that was still me referring to me. But like as a woman, I kissed my first girl in middle school. I had all of this sort of stuff and it was embraced. It was accepted. My parents would even make jokes that like they knew when I was a toddler that I was probably going to marry a woman, which is ironic considering now I'm married to a man. And I am a queer man slash non-binary person. So that was sort of embraced and accepted. But when I did have that beginnings of my gender questioning journey, that experience was initially very intrusive. I went through a 6-month period that is so distinct for me of, do you know of the show Shameless
Mhm.
by chance?
Mhm.
Okay. So when we get into Shameless, there's a trans character named Elliot.
Mhm.
That's the point when I was at in the show and I asked myself a question, and we're just going to be blunt here. We're going to be real here.
Bring
I
it.
asked myself internally, what if I had a penis? And the next morning I woke up and I was never the same.
Yeah.
I was never the same. I was stuck on this. And I grappled with that for 6 months before I was like, you know what? I think that I need to embrace this.
Mhm.
And I'll still have like intrusive experiences around my gender identity of like, what if I'm not actually trans? What if I'm not actually like a man? What if I just lied to myself? But I love who I am now. And so I know that those are ego dystonic at that point.
Yeah.
But I think that this fear of disappointing my family, disappointing my mom, especially who I was her oldest daughter. I was her like mini me, you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
If I came out as trans, came out as wanting to be a man, then that would shatter this whole dynamic, which
Mhm.
was why that experience ended up being intrusive at first
Mhm.
until I decided to start actually embracing myself and who I was.
Mhm.
So I've been able to have that experience. So there's all these different things that like
Layers. Yeah.
happen all along each other.
Yeah. Well, and I super appreciate you being able to share that experience because I think a question that people have sometimes, especially when there's gender fluidity, sexual fluidity, there can be lots of different layers to it, is, well, how do I know if it's egocentric or not? Because it was intrusive in the beginning because of maybe how societal expectations were placed at the time. Maybe again within the parenting relationship, not wanting to let them down, but also wanting to embrace who you are and that difficulty. And so if we kind of look at it and we go, well, what's egocentric is the feeling of this really feels like me, but also I
Mhm.
don't want to upset the apple cart. The apple cart was
Yeah.
very sensitive. It still is a sensitive apple cart, right?
Oh, yeah.
But that's a different kind of intrusion than what OCD can do and kind of also
Yeah.
come in and be like, "Okay, so your identity is value driven to you? Actually,
Mhm.
it is value driven to me. Okay,
Yeah.
well, OCD is opportunistic, so that jerk's gonna
Oh,
jump in there and be like, "Are you? Are you not? Are you? But what if you got that wrong? What if you're living a lie? What if? What if? What if?" And so we can see how OCD often will jump if it's something that you value, but also there can be these complications of really being curious and exploring who you are and understanding better who you are as an autistic person too, trying to go like, how much of this is who I am and who culture wants me to be? So it also can be that
yeah.
kind of, am I just doing this because I feel like I've been programmed to do this? Or am I doing this because I want to do this? What does that even mean? So it had
Yeah.
to be very, very confusing.
And like my OCD is absolutely attached to my autistic identity too, because like I
Hmm.
was diagnosed as autistic at 8 years old, but it was kind of an odd situation where it was right after a very odd and traumatic move experience. And so like my OCD is like, well, are you actually autistic or are you just like super traumatized? And it's like, all right, dude, it's probably both.
You're like, "Wait, what? We don't have to choose. It can be both.
Yeah.
They both can contribute." Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We're not the DSM-4 dude. So, but
I love that. That's the diagnostic statistical manual, which, the medical model does like to define things for folks, especially when it comes to autistic folks.
mhm,
So, yes, yes, that's a little insider diagnostic humor.
for sure. And I think that that is also part of my autistic identity is like I make kind of weird jokes that are very specific to like psychology and mental health stuff. And like you have to be in that niche to sort of get it sometimes.
Yeah,
Um,
we all
but to me,
do.
I'm the funniest thing on this planet when I do that. So
No, you are. When you're in the right crowd and it lands because they get it, you're
mhm,
like, I know, it's pretty witty, wasn't
yeah.
it? I like
Yeah.
it. So you were saying that you noticed too for your autistic identity, are you really autistic? Are you autistic enough? Are you really traumatized? Did you mess this up? Is your OCD alive? How many people listening or family members have heard your loved one go, what if I'm making all this up? Right?
I'm gonna raise both hands
Yes,
right here
yes.
just because, yes,
I'm
it's
gonna
like
raise hands and then I'm gonna jazz them because I can. So there we go.
literally.
Absolutely. So all of these things, and when you were 8, then this would have been only a handful of years probably before your mom's first cancer. Was it her first cancer when your youngest was a toddler?
Yeah, yeah. So I was 11 at the time. So it was shortly after he was born, about a year, maybe 2
Yeah.
after. It was cervical cancer. And then when I was 14, he was 4 years old, the youngest that is, it was breast cancer. And so all of this relates to BRCA
I
genetics.
was just gonna
Um,
say without
yeah,
I was gonna say if you don't have to say if you don't want to, but that sounds very BRCA. Yeah.
yeah. And so this was something that's been like a long-standing family history of having BRCA genetics. My grandmother had breast cancer in her early 40s, mom getting breast cancer in her mid to early 30s. So this was also looming over me kind of going into teenhood and early 20s because it
Absolutely.
does
Yeah.
come younger and younger with each generation. So
I was gonna say
I,
for any of the biologically born females in the house, then you have this well, not even for the boys though, right? With
yeah,
BRCA.
yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
'Cause even men can get breast
Breast
cancer.
cancer, right.
It's so under talked about, but yeah, men can get breast cancer. It's a very real thing. And obviously, don't quote me on this because I'm not a medical doctor, but because I do believe that BRCA does impact things like prostate cancer as well.
Yeah.
For our men who do end up like having these BRCA genetics, there are just many. The list of the cancer risks that you could have when you have the BRCA genetic is like
Yeah.
massive. So
To the point that the medical community, and I only know this because I have a dear friend that has the BRCA mutation and
mhm,
has had cancer and also had some of these preventative surgeries to prevent further occurrences. But yes, they will do preventative double mastectomies, they will do hysterectomies, and I don't even know what they would do preventatively for prostate because I'm not aware of that enough. But yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's a pretty high threat level. So if you look again at not only protecting mom, feeling like, gosh, she is so susceptible to
yeah,
have a reoccurrence. And then also for yourself, for all your siblings, you feel like, gosh,
yeah.
that had to be scary.
And for me, like in my teens, I planned my life as if I was going to test BRCA positive.
Yeah.
So at 18, when I see my first gynecologist and I test BRCA negative, like all of these preventative surgery plans that were like, I am going to prevent cancer at all costs. Like it was like, oh, like that's not as necessary now because I don't have this BRCA genetic that's like attached to me, but
Yeah.
that doesn't stop OCD from being like, yeah, but what if you have a tumor that you don't know
Yeah.
about?
What if
Or
they
like,
missed something? What if somehow the
yeah,
lab results got confused? What if you were the medical
yeah.
marvel where they're like, actually, what we're learning about BRCA is this super tumor that can just show up?
Oh, yeah. Like, OCD is so creative.
But you know what, family, and we talk about this too, like OCD is only as creative as the brain that has OCD, and OCD warriors are some of the most creative people I've ever met in my life. And so part of it, I like to take the credit where we can from OCD and be like, it's just because we're so damn creative that we can come up with so many different scenarios. But it can be very haunting because those
Yeah.
scenarios are intrusive, they're unwanted, they're
Oh, yeah.
distressing. And so having those kind of ideas populate what feels so effortless, but then we can learn through different strategies. We can contribute to constructing these ideas too, but they just appear in a split second. Our brains
Yes.
are, as Mike Hetty has told me in our practitioner field, he's quoted, our brains are Olympic level good at going there. Like, yep, we've trained for this.
Yes.
We have trained for thinking of the ultimate worst case scenario before a split second goes by, and we are on it. And if we also just think of the developmental stages we go through childhood anyway, the early adolescence and adolescence time is such a strong piece of identity shaping and forming development. And so you had all of this going on at the same time, such critical pieces of identity were forming your sexuality, your sense of self, your gender. And I can only imagine just how amplified that must have felt. And then you go into college, which is the time we know where OCD can spike quite a bit, especially if
Oh,
you're leaving the home. Were you staying at home to kind of help take care of things and doing college, or did you go away to college and stay in like a dorm?
yeah. So it started with community college and staying at home
Uh huh.
because, like, we were I don't want to use the word forced, but I will say like heavily encouraged
Mm-hmm.
to do completely online school. So that
Mm-hmm.
way we could be much more supportive at home.
And save money,
Um,
right? And all the
yeah,
things. Yeah, 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 yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And so I didn't get my driver's license, things like that. Not by a personal choice. I know for some people with OCD that like delays in getting your driver's license are due to some of that fear of harm. Shockingly, that is not something that my harm OCD attached to was driving.
Well, I'm glad for
But
you. I'm glad for you.
it's all
I
right.
I get some OCD fear around driving. Don't love it. So I'm kind of glad
Trust
that you
me,
don't have
it
that
still
left.
comes up now that we do, but it didn't prevent me from getting my license,
Yeah.
which is a good thing, something I'm grateful for sure. But we were staying at home a lot, doing online college through community college. And then once I got my associate's degree, this was when we started to move out of the house. And it started with a situation where I sort of moved in with my boyfriend at the time, who is now my husband.
Ooh, Mr.
Yes.
Pizza.
Yeah, Mr. Pizza. And I will say pizza is his last name. I took his last name. So I can't take credit for that. My family can't take credit for that, unfortunately. But it is only a slice of me, but it's the cheesiest part, is what
Oh,
I
I
like to
was gonna
say.
say, I love that. I love the pun. That's
Oh,
just the
yes.
slice, but cheesy. Yes, no, actually,
Yes.
because we talked about this at the conference. I was like, what was it like growing up Ashton Pizza? And you were like, I don't know. You can ask my husband what it was like growing up
Yes.
pizza. But I love that you took his name and it was something to the effect that you were like, he has embraced it so much. I remember you saying that he had incorporated it into handles, etc. And so I was like,
Hmm.
I love that. Yes, go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a great name. It's a great name.
Humor is such a resilience factor, like
It is.
truly.
It
So
is.
that was definitely a big piece. But sort of getting into like going for my bachelor's degree, that was the point when we moved out. We started to be a lot more disconnected from the home situation.
Yeah.
And when you come out of a, like, what can be considered like traumatic home space and you start to get into spaces that are safer,
Mhm.
all of your safety behaviors become more distressing
Mhm.
instead of actual functional defense mechanisms.
Mhm.
So that's when the cleaning started to actually feel a little bit more distressing,
Right.
was because it wasn't as justifiable to feel safe, but we're still doing it because it's the only way we can feel safe when our body is just constantly activated in that way.
Right.
But OCD sort of moved on almost to my career.
Mhm.
And we had to make a switch from, I was originally biomed, wanting to do medical type of stuff.
Mhm.
And then I failed statistics. And the school that I was at didn't have a grade forgiveness program. It was basically choose a different math class and change your major. This is your only choice.
Oh, you couldn't even retake the class and pass it?
No, no retaking. And I know, and that was
Damn,
weird. That was weird. And I
that
don't
is
know if
weird.
that was just, I don't know if that was just the guidance counselor that I had, or if that was just the policy the school had at the time.
Oddly
But
oddly, statistically, I think that's kind of an outlier that
yeah,
that they don't do that.
yeah. But I like to think of it as like, as much as that was awful, things happen for a reason.
Mhm.
Things come out the way that they're sort of meant to be. I originally switched to education. So my associate's degree is in education.
Mhm.
And I was like, I don't know if I want to be in a classroom.
All the teachers
So,
are like, "You don't. We love you, teachers." They're all like,
yes.
"We're
Oh, so much
exhausted,
respect.
burn out, all the stuff."
So much respect.
Yes.
Oh, but when I kind of moved into an actual university and I was trying to sort of figure out what I wanted to do, I found out about social work. And so
Mhm.
this was, like I said, originally motivated by wanting to do queer advocacy. I had been starting to get mental health services, and there was just so much stigma around queer identities. I had been misdiagnosed as bipolar.
Oh.
Never had a manic episode.
Of course not.
Psychiatrists,
It's
yeah,
your magic bipolar diagnosis without mania. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, like, I told the psychiatrist, I was like, "I've never had a manic episode." He's like, "Not yet."
Oh my
And I'm
gosh.
like,
How
"Uh,
dismissive.
yeah." And there is a family history of bipolar. So I
Mhm.
think that this is, like, this automatic label that they give people of, like, "Oh, just because you have a family history, like, you are predestined to have a manic episode. And it's like, well,
It's like BRCA and it's in a
no.
mental health form, right? It's
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
like you are predestined for all this shit, Ashton.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
Which
like,
which totally doesn't help OCD's fear
no,
of like losing control and
right.
like not being stable or
They're like,
sane.
it's pretty much a dead end that you're gonna end up here. Yeah, and
Exactly.
we'll clarify, family, just in case, because I know that Ashton, you're gonna join me in this thought. Like, we are absolutely not shaming or shading anybody that does have
No.
bipolar or has experienced mania. The thing that's frustrating is
Mhm.
prescribing giving certainty to something that doesn't have certainty, right?
Yeah.
And with
Yeah.
the brain that goes, "Well, I need certainty in all these places where I'm not gonna have certainty." And then they give you this prognosis that's like, "Here is the really hard thing you are gonna crash
Mhm.
into at some point. We don't
Yeah.
know when, but it's gonna happen." That's like, it's just it's so pejorative, it's so
Yeah.
unhelpful, it's so toxic,
Well,
and
and you also get like other stigmatized views from this practitioner, like
yeah.
being asked if I thought my gender identity was a bipolar delusion.
Oh.
Yeah.
I
So,
hope we fired this practitioner. Did we go to a
oh
new
yeah, word
yeah.
moved on
You're
far
like
from
"Bye."
mhm, bye. So this was like what drove me to go to social work because I was like, this is so unjust.
Yeah.
We could be doing so much better for queer people who live with complex mental health disorders.
Right.
What is super fun about undiagnosed OCD at this stage is, especially having harm themes, is I'm getting into, so we have like COVID coming in that last year. We have all of this stress building up. And then on top of that, I'm like, "Oh my god, do I even wanna do one-on-one work? What if" and I recognize it now in hindsight as being afraid of harming a client
Yeah.
in a one-on-one situation, being afraid that I wouldn't act in an ethical way, that I would do something that would hurt somebody, and OCD taking things like trouble with getting a job after I graduate from my bachelor's degree as evidence
Yes.
that we weren't meant to do this,
Yeah.
but it didn't stop me from pursuing my master's degree in social work. Instead, with the master's degree, we went into more of a meso and macro lens. So, more of a community engagement side, more of a policy advocacy side, still working within like the queer sphere. So, I did my master's internship with the LGBT plus Center of Orlando. Big
Awesome.
shout out, working with survivors of the Pulse shooting in victim
Mm.
advocacy and doing a lot of work in Orlando around queer engagement, queer activism, things like that. And it was very powerful work. But in the background of doing my internship, I was having severe relationship OCD around my husband
Mhm.
and wondering at the time we were still like sort of just engaged, but it was very much every night was a cycle of seeking reassurance
Mhm.
of if I was worthy of love, what was good about me, what was likable about me, why he was even with me. And
Yeah.
just, getting into these cycles to the point where he's like, why do you keep asking this? And I'm like, I don't know. And it's like the answer that's like, yeah, you're fine. You're good. Like, I love you. Like, you're a great person.
Yeah.
And then it's through tears asking again.
Yeah.
And so this is like where in hindsight, I look back and I'm like, oh, like OCD was like big bad here because I
Yeah.
didn't understand what was happening with me
Yeah.
that kept this cycle going. And evidently, it took a year and a half after this for me to even recognize that I had OCD because we get to the end of graduate school, things had gotten better with my husband. We had had a lot of conversations. We had breaking points that we were able to kind of come back from. And I'm so grateful every single day for his patience, for his love, for the things that he's been able to put up with from OCD from me because
Yeah.
lesser people would have walked away. And I could have very easily lost that relationship
Yeah.
that has been so supportive to me otherwise.
Well, and it brings up a really interesting point that I think a lot of us suffer with. When we're at a different place in our OCD treatment or recovery, we start to have that grief and we can have that shame about, like, Oh my gosh, how this impacted the relationships around us. So this, obviously we're the OCD Family Podcast and we're giving these support to family members, but also like sometimes we can feel like, gosh, I owe you big. I feel so bad that you had to deal with it. Like what we were dealing with was a cakewalk. No, it wasn't a
Oh, yeah.
cakewalk either. But
No.
but it is complex because you can be like, gosh, I feel for how this impacted the people I love, and I'm grieving that this was really difficult and they endured these hard seasons. But what's funny is it's not unique to just OCD, right? Like we can see that
Mm,
in your mom's cancer journey and all that. Like when we deal with health challenges, whether it's a physical health challenge, a mental health challenge, we deal with the effects because we're all
mm,
people and the family system absorbs that. And so seeing how your at the time fiance was like, I do not know what's going on with you, but yes, we're good. And then when you're on the other side of it going, oh my gosh, how did you not get fed up with me? Thank you. But I feel like I owe you. I'm indebted to you. And the reality is we do show up for them in their own ways too. And so it's
yeah.
part of that process of processing the grief of like, I feel sad about how this impacted the people I care about. And then also that appreciation of like, but I love and I'm thankful for their patience. And isn't that like really what we want to find in a partner? Is somebody that is going to accept us for who we are. And that sounds
Mhm.
like who you have in Mr. Pizza there.
No,
So
for sure.
I love that. Good job. Good job, hubby.
Yes.
Yes.
And, like, that's the thing is, like, we went through that grief process, but I think that over time, I've moved to we can't change that this happened. We understand it better now, and all that I have is gratitude
Hmm.
for that.
Hmm.
Gratitude that he cared about me enough, he loved me enough, he saw that the behaviors that we now know, him and I now both know, was OCD. Gratitude that he did not see that as fundamentally me,
Hmm.
that he knew that this was not who I was as a person deep down.
Hmm.
So it's a lot. I think that there is a big grief process that we go through. And I'm very fortunate to have been able to transition into this gratitude phase of I am so grateful that you are a good enough partner, not a perfect partner,
Right, it's
but
not.
a good enough
Yeah,
partner
yeah,
to tolerate the ugly sides of me because that's what being a good enough partner is it's being able to tolerate the good, the bad, and the ugly of people.
yeah. Well, and I would encourage you to include yourself in that list too, to be grateful for you not giving up, for you fighting through
Mhm.
the torture of, as hard as it may have been for him,
Yeah,
having you feel so unstable in his love for you, you also had to choose to keep showing up because that is
yeah.
so hard. And you were fighting OCD in that way and all the other ways that OCD
Oh,
was
yeah.
attacking. And so there's a cliche, and sometimes the community, whether it's the treatment community, lived experience community, go, there's nothing positive that comes from OCD, and people shouldn't praise it as a good thing or anything like
Mhm.
that, right? And I get what they're saying because people misunderstand OCD and they mischaracterize it. And so the positives they're drawing out of it aren't really positives. Like, but you're a
Yeah.
really efficient worker. When your mom needed you to step up in this different way. Yeah, that actually was so terrifying and hard for
Mhm.
me, right? So we don't like that reframe. But where I do kind of find the gratefulness as well, and I share this with clients when they come in to see me, is that there's so many things in life we're not gonna know, and part of the superpower and the strength of learning that you have OCD, learning how to manage it, is to be able to be okay with that. And the gratefulness/freedom that comes from not needing to answer and serve the thoughts, images, sounds, different things that can pop up that can be intrusive in so many different ways, to have freedom from needing to engage in the endless hours sometimes of compulsions, weeks, months, years. Like that is such a gift when we
Yeah.
can feel that freedom. And so that's part of the power of knowing because then we can do something about it. Also, in you talking about, like, your whole journey from how you then started to look at those community focuses, I'm like, it makes 1,000% sense that I met you in the listening sessions because that would have been, like, naturally, why would I not be there? I'm gonna be
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So I
And you
love
can
that.
also see, like, when I get into treatment, we're working backwards because now being a one-on-one clinician,
Yeah.
we're almost like working ourselves out of that OCD backwards,
Yeah.
where we're back in community engagement, we're back in advocacy, and then we're back to being okay with being a one-on-one clinician.
Yes, I love that. Yes, that
Mhm.
it's not, "I'm gonna create and bring harm and potentially hurt someone." Now you have the ability to step in and help bring hope, recovery, tools, all these different things, and we get to say, "Screw you, OCD. Screw you." I mean,
That guy's a
seriously.
jerk.
Yes, so for sure, for sure. Like, not welcome, can't sit at our table.
Yes.
Yeah, no, no, no.
And and getting into, like, because we talked about masking a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
when I was going through this whole graduate program and at home, we were having this super difficult time. Like, I got to talk to my former supervisor. Actually, when I was in Orlando for the conference, I got to visit my old internship, go
Aw.
back to my old stomping grounds, you'll say. And I kind of talked to him about that because I was open with him about, like, yeah, like, I've kind of been out of the field for about 2 years. I had went through this OCD recovery journey, and this was kind of going on in the background of my internship. They had no idea. They thought that everything was fine. They thought that everything was great. There was a lot of masking
Yeah,
in my internship
yeah.
that, like, made it seem like there wasn't anything going wrong in my life, but it's almost like this is why the criteria for diagnosis is areas of functioning impacted, because you can be super high functioning in your education, in your job, but if your relationships, if at home, if your downtime
Mhm,
is an absolute mess,
mhm.
then that's still being impacted. Your life is still being impacted, even
Absolutely.
if you're functioning in, the ways that you're societally expected to.
Yeah. And again, like you said, and depending what kind of intersections we're looking at, like some people have had to master masking, which is so dangerous. And we could go into a whole episode on itself in terms of
Oh,
the
yes.
the burnout and the effects of masking on people, aside from the obvious of not getting to live your authentic self. But it's so hard on your nervous system, to say the least.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
just say that. And so we look at that, and for so many people, they don't even know what it means to unmask. There are a lot of people walking
Mhm.
around just starting to figure out, I think I might be late diagnosed, undiagnosed autistic, or I'm recognizing different intersections within me. And so, what does it even mean to unmask? To feel like you can be yourself. You have basically fought this programming again for so long that you need to respond this way because that's what society accepts. And what you're doing over
Mhm.
here is disruptive. We don't like that. You can't respond that way. You need to respond this way. And if you want access to your tools and your supports, you need to act this way.
Yeah.
And so it's a much bigger problem. And it's something that we talk a lot about in the pursuit of neurodivergent affirming care, in BIPOC care, in justice based ERP, in so many different aspects, because it really it is important, and a lot of people don't even realize they're masking, and so, like we said,
Yeah.
back then and even now you're talking about now, like, so many people with OCD too are like, "Yeah, I hide that shit. I'm gonna do everything I can, even if I'm having a nervous breakdown or a panic attack to try and hide that because 'cause I'm afraid. I'm afraid of that getting exposed, and I'm ashamed. I'm
Yeah.
ashamed
Oh,
that
yeah.
because I think I could hurt people or whatever the thing is." Yeah,
OCD
that's
is so shame
it
based because
is.
it's so against what you believe. It's so counter to what matters to you. And, like, talking about unmasking, like, just because this is not a visual thing, we have people listening and, like, y'all can't see it, but we're doing some lovely unmasking here. Myself, as an autistic person, I'm having this conversation with Nicole here while crocheting as a STEM, which is something that I think that a couple years back I would not be able to do. But I feel like because I'm crocheting right now, I'm able to better be involved in this conversation. I'm better able to, like, keep my thoughts together
Yeah.
And that is unmasking, is not having to hide, like, hey, like, I kind of need this so that way we can have a more effective conversation.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's interesting. I was having a conversation with a guest once, and I will just kind of keep it general for confidentiality's sake. But I was talking with a guest, and they were like, "Oh, I'm so nervous. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And I, without even realizing it, trying to make them feel comfortable. My aim was great. I'm giving myself a pat on the back for my aim. But I was like, "It's okay. You're great. You're good. We got this." And I'm trying to encourage them. But they were like, "It is okay for me to be, like, anxious, though." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. Like, yes, absolutely." And they were like, "This is part of me
Mhm.
unmasking to be like, and I am nervous." And I was
Yeah.
like, "You know what? That is such a great point. Because
But that also
sometimes."
shows me your growth because we started this and you were like, "Are you nervous?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." And you're like, "That's normal." You normalized it instead of telling me I'd be okay.
Yeah, what a little
Yeah.
unexpected little gift you gave me, and thank
Oh,
you for that's a good reflection for me to hold on to, because it's just one of those things, though, where you go, our intentions can be good, and so, fam, I don't want anybody listening to go like, "Oh my gosh, what do I say? I can't say anything." I think the more important part, and you tell me what you think, Ashton, is to have an open stance and realize, and I love great intentions, so let's keep loving our people and doing what we can to be open to that. But also, if someone doesn't receive it that way, instead of getting butthurt or offended or feeling shame ourselves, we can go, "Oh, that is really helpful feedback." And while we're not gonna be able to please everyone, and we need to be authentic to who we are too, so we're gonna process the things the way we
yeah.
process them, being open to it instead of being like, "But this is what I meant. You shouldn't have taken it that way." We go, "Oh, you know what? That's really helpful. And I'm gonna keep that in mind. Thank you for letting me know." Like, just to be able to validate that we're not all gonna think about things the
Yeah.
same way, and it's really important to have that learning, and not only learning, the listening. It all winds back to the listening. Ah, yeah. The active listening is a little bit of a lost art, which is interesting with social media because you can have such farther reach than you ever could, but we do have listening problems, so we kind of find our camps that kind of
Mhm.
echo the things the way we think them at times. Not everybody, I don't wanna paint with too broad of a stroke, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
it happens, and how many times are you like, "I really thought this," and then somebody sent me a reel and said it in a different way, and I'm like, you know what? I was wrong." Like, people,
Mhm.
they're not often they usually have a bias, they're looking for people to confirm their bias. We all do it in our own way, so myself included, I'm sure. But it is interesting, it's kind of a lost art, the act of listening, and it's so important, and so often OCD can tell us, "Yeah, you really screwed that up beyond repair. You really sucked it up." And that's where that pervasive even perfectionism of, like, "I had to do this right or else, and I didn't," can be so hard. It can be so hard.
CD's like, "You have to be perfect the first time."
Right, right. My joke in grad school, because there are theories and talking about what good enough really means, and so I remember going in once, and I got, like, an A minus on a writing assignment in graduate school, and I went in to talk to the teacher, and we kind of battled back and forth. I was advocating for how I thought I made a point, and I think really the aim wasn't even about that point, it was feeling like, "I've gotta get an A to be
Mhm.
successful." And the graduate professor looked at me and was like, "What's the difference?" And I'm like, "Between the A and the A minus?" And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, "It's good enough grade." And I'm like,
Mhm.
and I had to realize my idea for good enough was it has to be perfect. And
Mhm.
so they said to me, "You know what, Nicole? If you go through thinking you have to have an A in everything, you're gonna miss out on a lot."
Yeah. OCD sees that minus, like, in big red
Yes.
marker. Yeah.
Yes. And in a way, what I've learned, and I've tried to teach this with my kids too, to not be just performance based here, is that for me, it was a version of my own kind of masking of feeling like I have to be perfect. And if I'm not perfect, I have to fight for the perfection. And if it's not perfection, it's not good enough. And so I was like, yeah, good enough, but it has to be the A. And so it wasn't even about what I was learning in the assignment was I needed to get that minus changed. And
Yeah.
I was missing. I was missing a lot, and I've kind of taken us on a little roundabout about
Yeah.
good enough here. But yeah, so taking it back to where you were able to connect. Sorry about that.
Oh,
'Cause
you're okay.
taking
It's
it
all valuable. It really is, though.
Thank you, Ashton. I
Yeah.
agreed, and thank you. So you were talking with the person that was it the director of the clinic where you did your internship or the organization there in Orlando, and you were telling them about your
Yeah.
experience with OCD work.
Yeah. And this was the same weekend as the conference.
Yeah.
So, and like one, I was able to actually learn about his own lived experiences with dealing with some OCD tendencies and like how he had to kind of like deal with some retroactive jealousy in his own personal relationships. But when I talked about like what was going on for me in the background of my internship, he was like, yeah, we had no idea that there was anything going on. Like you showed up every day, you were amazing. You had such an energy and like no one could tell that there was all of this stuff going on in the background.
Mhm.
But I was also driving to and from my internship an hour there and an hour back.
Mhm.
So it's like the mornings you have that hour to hype yourself up.
Yeah.
And then the hour back is just intrusive thought, intrusive thought, intrusive thought, intrusive thought.
Right.
Just priming you to get home for OCD to start doing its lovely little compulsion cycle.
Right. Right. Yeah. When you were describing too, even the process of when you had first moved in with your fiance, who was boyfriend at the time, right?
Mhm,
And how you were noticing kind of that ratcheting up because
mhm,
even though you had left the environment where those skills really were needed,
mhm,
now you were in this environment where your brain was like, you can't stop or you're going to be in danger, but it was a different
mhm,
environment. That is such a common experience, whether it's college age or maybe somebody
mhm,
just moving somewhere from work or just getting out of the family house or whatever the situation is. But when you're leaving that environment, that you start to understand how even if there were some traumatic triggers and different dynamics that you're like, oh, this is going to
mhm,
be good to escape from, your environment has also been set up for your OCD to thrive, right?
mhm.
And so you go into another environment and you think, blank canvas, this is great. And then your OCD screams because it's like,
Yeah.
no, we gotta get this place into shape. This is not what we needed. And so often, even with kiddos going to college, sometimes as therapists, we'll get questions from parents or caregivers going, hey, can you write a letter to the college? This person really needs to be on their own. They're going to be really triggered in their OCD if they have to be with a roommate and this and that and whatever. And we're like, is this going to be a healthy accommodation or is this going to be accommodating OCD? And
Mhm.
often it is accommodating OCD because the person can get so overwhelmed and then create this kind of barricade in their new environment, trying to mimic and create. And they were dependent on their environment to follow through and praise and reinforce some of the compulsive cycles. And so getting out on your own or moving in with a roommate or a partner, it can be extremely triggering too. So I'm really glad you brought up kind of what that process was like because
Yeah.
we see that a lot for people in
Mhm.
emerging adulthood as they're going and they're leaving the consistency of the high school experience, the regimen of the schedule, like it or not, whether it was
Yeah.
easy or hard, like it was
Yeah.
consistent. You knew what to expect.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're going into this new environment. Yeah.
Well, and especially being autistic too, like
Yes.
consistency, routine are
Yes.
like big things. So yeah, it's like you almost carry those behaviors with you because you're trying to maintain some sort of status quo of routine and consistency,
Yeah.
even if those behaviors are no longer actively serving you. It's just, I forget what the word is in ICBT, automation,
Mhm.
I think is what it was, where you've been doing the behaviors for so long that you forget why they started. It just becomes so automatic.
Well, and you think about it, going back to that quote that I gave from Mike Hetty of our brains are Olympic level good. Like,
Mhm.
not only automatic, but precise. You think of like, we were talking about the Olympics before, like how hard these superhuman Olympians, like even the person that scores less is so much more like equipped than I could ever be for pick a thing, any of them, right?
Mhm.
And so it's amazing because if you think about that, then, and part of what I really like about the analogy of being Olympic level good is like how hard we have worked to craft the precision, the skill, the compulsion, the avoidance, whatever it is, and how trained our brain is. Like, this isn't a day of training, it's not a week of training. For a lot of us, it's years because we can go back and go, shit, that thing when I was 5. Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Like, these were some early signs. I just didn't know because that was my
Yeah.
normal. So the change in routine too, and one of the things I'm very open about how all 3 of my kids are autistic, and we do this anytime we travel even. We travel away from home, and we're gonna have a break from home, but how can we recreate some structure that's from
Yeah.
home and have them kind of be able to choose and pick what can be helpful going into, say, a hotel or an Airbnb, and what do you wanna bring over that's gonna feel familiar and helpful? And so we went to New York this summer before the conference. We went to New York and then we
Mhm.
went on a cruise to Bermuda, and it was a whole event. But I knew going into it that New York, as exciting as it would be overstimulating as all get out, right?
Yeah.
And so we kept it real low key. The only thing we had on the agenda before we went on this cruise was we're going to take a boat to the Statue of Liberty. We can walk around, we can have ice cream, we can go home. We're not going to put anything else on the must do list. We're just going to
Yes.
keep it easy. And I kid you not, one of the favorite things from our trip, we stayed at this cute hotel in Manhattan. And there was in one of the hotel rooms, they had this really big kind of walk-in closet. And
Mhm.
we have a hideaway, kind of a sensory hideaway that I transformed in one of my kids' rooms for a closet that could just be like there's calming lights, there's books, there's fidgets, there's cushions, there's things
Mhm.
that, whatever. And I looked in that and I thought, this is a big enough closet that we could kind of create our own little calm down cabin here where we can get a
Yeah.
sensory break or we can do books or whatever the thing is. And so I created this calm down cabin, and the popularity of, can I have a turn in calm down cabin? Can we go into calm down cabin? Even my husband's like, I could use some calm down cabin. Right. Uh,
Yes.
and so when we talk about what did we love about this summer? Oh, I loved going to New York. What was your favorite part of New York? I loved going to Calm Down Cabin. That and
Oh,
if the hotel provided breakfast, these were the number one things. They were like just the best, you know? And I'm like, isn't that interesting? So they love going to New York. It was a cool
Yeah.
experience, but they also needed to be able to have a space where they could have something familiar. And so you think about how OCD takes that, but to the intrusive opposite degree, right? It's
yeah.
like, we need to have the familiarity, and you know what? Everything is on fire. Danger, danger. All the alarms are going off. And so that is a really, really tough period. Plus, COVID was still in strong effect during that time
Oh,
for
yeah.
you, right? So
Mhm.
all of that amplifying everything. I mean,
Yes.
it's hard. So how did you get then from where you were in the hardest downside as you described it in the beginning to where you are now? Because that is quite the boomerang back here, mister.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we finished grad school and basically OCD ramps itself up from when we were in undergrad to like, oh, I can't work with one on one clients to I can't be a good enough social worker. I could harm anybody, do anything wrong.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to quit my career.
Mhm.
Super ego dystonic choice,
Right, you're like, "I
might
don't
I
want to, but I
say.
must. I must." Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause how am I supposed to like protect people,
Right.
so to speak?
You're like the heart of a social worker crushed, like crumbled. Yes.
Yes. And especially being someone who like the social work values are so in line. Like if you took the social work values and my values and you made a Venn diagram of them, it would be a circle pretty much. Like, so quitting my career was such an ego dystonic choice, but it was so demanded by OCD
Mhm.
because of that fear that I would harm somebody or that I wouldn't be able to do it well enough.
Mhm.
And OCD is never satisfied. It's never satisfied. You can avoid your triggers, but it's going to move on to something new.
Right.
And so then we start to have a backslide with cooking where we're eating out 5 nights out of the week when I normally love cooking
Mhm.
because I'm afraid of touching meat, because I'm
Mhm.
afraid of harming my husband if we
Mhm.
get sick and things like that. And at this point, I'm essentially doing stuff as a stay at home husband. We're dealing with some other life circumstances. We lived in an RV for like 6, 7 months and just, I don't want to get too deep into that. But for anyone who is thinking about moving into an RV, you have to be a very special type of person, first and foremost.
Yeah.
We described it as a rich man's glorified homelessness. Um, so make sure you have a plan before you move into an RV to live in an RV.
More than that sounds fun. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So at this time, I am starting to listen to different podcasts, one example being the Purely OCD podcast,
Yeah.
and starting to actually like learn more about OCD
Hmm.
because I'm trying to kind of like better understand myself. I'm diagnosed with autism at this point. I'm diagnosed with ADHD at this point,
Hmm.
but it feels like there's clearly something else going on here.
Yeah.
And me having trouble with cooking, having trouble with contamination, even though that contamination is more concerned about harm,
Right. Right. Right.
contamination is like, oh, like that's what we learn about is OCD in school.
Right.
That's what they teach us is OCD in grad school. So it becomes much more like, oh, maybe this is OCD that I'm dealing with. And then I start learning more and more. And I'm like, oh my God, this from my history and this from my history and this and this. And all of the dots start connecting. And then I'm like, okay, what do I do with this now?
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Right.
So obviously, before we could start with that, it was about getting housing situation stabilized. Because as much as when you figure out what your mental health situation is, you want to get into treatment as soon as possible so you can get back to your life as soon as possible. If you're in a crisis, a
Mhm.
housing crisis in whatever sort of situation you're in, crisis management has to come first. So
Absolutely.
we had to get into stable housing first. And then that was about a year after I graduated from grad school.
Hmm.
I decided to seek an OCD specialist. We had moved from Florida to rural Tennessee. So access was not great.
Especially access with affirming,
Mhm.
open. Yeah. 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 All the things
Yeah.
for
Oh, for
intersections. Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's lots of great people here in Tennessee who I've met who are OCD specialists who do LGBTQ plus work. Katie Boyer being one of them, who I
Hmm.
met at the conference, who like just fantastic. I could say so many great things about Katie, but her working in Nashville, that's like 5 hours from me.
Yeah.
The closest OCD clinics are in Knoxville, which is like an hour and a half away. And so a lot of the mental health services in our area are very general and generic.
Right.
And me knowing talk therapy makes OCD worse,
Right.
one, it made a lot of the other therapeutic interventions I had been in make sense why at a certain point we plateau and go downhill. And so we sought No CD.
Yeah.
I got my treatment services through No CD
Love that.
because they created a lot of access to be able to do therapy virtually.
Yeah.
And we started our exposure work essentially working backwards.
Yeah.
And by the point that I got into treatment, what actually really did push me into treatment was like getting into super, super ego dystonic, pedophilic OCD thoughts, where it's like, what if you harm that kid? What if you have
Yeah.
bad intentions?
Right.
And I'm like, that is disgusting.
Right. So
Like,
ego dystonic. So ego dystonic.
so. And that's the thing is like when we talk about like needing to talk more about OCD and disgust
Yeah.
and how it impacts disgust instead of just it being an anxiety thing,
Yeah.
like the idea of someone being sexual with a child is absolutely disgusting to me.
Yeah.
Just absolutely disgusting to me. And so of course it's going to take advantage of that.
Right,
And
because it's
that,
gonna strike what you value. You value
hmm
safety and what is
hmm
pedophilia in the broader sense, and not talking
hmm
about pedophilia OCD, but the classical definition we have, an assault
hmm
on a child, that's one of the gravest harms. So OCD says, "Oh, well, what if you could do that?" And so for
yeah,
anybody new to hearing about this form of OCD, it's absolutely not pedophilia, and the person thinking it is the first to tell you, "I would never wanna do that." And which
hmm
which is why it is such a cruel form, and one that is pretty
yeah,
stigmatized and misunderstood. And so, again, very thankful for you bringing that up and sharing your history with that, because that is so, so
mhm.
tricky. And so you were like, "Okay, treatment, because I can't with this. I can't with this
Yeah.
intrusive thought. I can't."
Yeah, because like we can manage the like not being able to touch chicken. We can figure out how to live our life around abandoning our career. But this to me was so distant. I was like, I need to get treatment like now
Yeah.
because this is not, I'm not okay with living with any of this. thoughts
Absolutely.
for. And so we get into treatment, we start working essentially backwards from there. So we start kind of doing exposures around the POCD. We start doing exposures around cooking and around chicken and around being in the kitchen again. We're doing social anxiety exposures because that's a very high comorbidity when we have autism. Being autistic, there's a lot of social anxiety that comes from, dealing with social and communication deficits and
Sure,
things like
sure.
that, being very different, you
Yeah,
could
yeah.
say, socially. So putting myself back out in public spaces,
Mhm,
I went from being able to only go out and be out in public for an hour and
mhm.
then feeling so exhausted that I had to come home and take like a 3-hour nap to now I go out and work 10 hours at my job. I got a job at Bath and Body Works as part of my exposures. Um,
Wow!
yes,
That's yes, because 'cause you're, like, all up in the customer service, and "Can I help you find this?" and "Go try that."
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was part of like my exposure work, just getting really creative with that because it was about like, I don't want to live by OCD's rules anymore. I feel so upset, so anxious, so panicked by so many things in life,
Yeah.
but I just can't live in its cage.
Yeah.
It's literally a cage that it puts you in,
Yeah.
and I just could not do it anymore. I felt so unhappy with my life. And that's like the contradiction of OCD. It's like, well, you need to avoid these things to feel safe. You need to do these compulsions to feel safe, but it's not a life worth living.
And it's never enough. The thing is, even
No,
if you
never.
do it, it's like, that might still happen. And you're
Yeah.
like, "Well," it's
Mhm.
such a liar. It's a liar. It gives you that sense of, if you just do this,
Mhm.
then you won't become that, and it's
Yeah.
like, "No, actually, you already aren't. That's not what
Yeah.
you want, that's not what you're
Oh, yeah.
about. You aren't that, just
And if
because
my
you have this
story is
concept."
anything, it's proof that OCD is never satisfied. You can avoid everything that OCD tells you to avoid. You can move on from certain triggers and from certain situations that are particularly obsessive, and it will always find something new to torture you about. It will
Right,
always
right.
dig you deeper and deeper. And that was the thing with treatment was getting into ERP, it gave me a different approach to life. And I
Mhm.
think that because I know you're an ICBT girly,
I mean, I'm an
um,
ERP girly too. I like
yeah,
both.
both can exist. We are not black and white thinkers.
No,
Well,
that's
we were black and white thinkers, but
yeah,
recovery is
yeah,
no longer black and white.
that's right.
And both exist. And I
Right.
recognized like after I started listening to the OCD fan podcast, learning more about ICBT through it, like I was applying some of those principles to the ERP therapy without even realizing
Yeah,
that I was doing like sort of inference based work. But now like I'm going through the ICBT course, which shout out to OCD training school.
amazing,
For
amazing.
sure.
Yes,
Um,
amazing.
and like as I'm going through this course, like it's giving me words and like actual methods for things that I felt like I was already applying in my EAP work.
Yeah,
Just because like I had already been primed having done all of this clinical work through my professional stuff, it set me up to be able to do ERP in these ways where like I was able to kind of work and have all of that extra stuff going on. But we started, like I said, we started with undoing the POCD, pulling out of the cooking and like starting to cook more.
getting
Sorry,
your life
braining.
back,
Yeah.
living in the here and now, living
Yeah.
in your present, and doing your
Mhm.
value-driven activities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I started applying to social work jobs again, which was scary. It was scary to start. I feel like any exposures that you're doing, any type of OCD therapeutic work that you're doing is always scary to start.
Mhm.
But when you get to the point where like it pays off, like you're like, I see the value in moving beyond that fear now.
Yeah.
So we apply to my first social work job. I get the interview, but I don't get the job. And ironically, it was for the organization that I do work at now. And the person that I interviewed with was like, "Hey, like we just had a fantastic candidate pool. Like you should keep applying at our organization because you are a great candidate. We just had a massive amount of great candidates this go round."
Yeah.
And in some ways, it was one of those things that it was meant to happen because it gave me time to focus on studying for my master's license.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So I was able to put more attention to that, be able to do that and kind of focus in a lot. It gave me time to focus in on advocacy work, which evidently led me to being in those listening sessions.
Yes. I love that.
So, and that was the thing was I was like, I'm not going to wait for me to get a job
Yeah.
in my field for me to do work that matters to me, that's
Mhm.
in line with my values. And getting this job where I'm now a children and youth therapist,
Mhm.
which if you would have asked me a year ago was something that I would have been like, oh God, like I could never.
Yeah.
But now like I'm so satisfied. I'm
Yeah.
so fulfilled. I'm so excited for where I'm going. And like OCD is so mad about being a beginner
Yeah.
because it feels so like crushing,
Right.
but I feel this gratitude to be here now
Yeah.
in this space in my recovery journey and to be at this place. But it took going through the work, it took doing a lot of hard things
Yeah.
to find myself in this place where, like, yeah, I am a children and youth therapist.
Yeah.
I am doing all these things. I still live with intrusive thoughts, but I know that OCD is a jerk and he's
Right.
being bogus.
Right.
And I like to think that now I just am better able to recognize that I live with an OC brain
Yeah.
instead of it being the disorder.
Right. Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. That's such a beautiful way of putting it. Because your brain is going to brain. So your brain doesn't stop braining, right?
Yep.
But it doesn't have to wreak havoc on your life, on that home functioning, on the social
Hmm.
functioning. And, something that struck me as you were sharing about that is, like you said, OCD's never satisfied. And OCD took your world down to be as small as the RV and nothing outside
Hmm.
of it. And it still wasn't satisfied. And now the world is whatever you create it to be, whatever you value it to be, you can move towards that. And so even if you go for something and you're like, I'm going to apply to work. This would have been the biggest exposure of all time. They said no, but don't stop applying because you're great.
Yeah.
You're great. And then you did, and here you are. It's like, doesn't mean everything always will come to fruition right away, but it means the world is your oyster. It is no longer this, I don't know, 10 feet by 5 foot space or whatever it was, right?
Hmm.
Also, I tend to think in analogies, and you were talking about just how hard all of it's been, but it's led you to here. It kind of makes me think of like pottery, right? Like we can shape and mold pottery, but essentially it's going through the fire that helps it hold its shape and gives it its strength. And so it's like, gosh, you have to go through such hard heat to get places sometimes, but we can
Hmm.
also see how that journey has brought you here. And so we don't wish burning, fire, difficult, pain, fear on anyone, but we can also use that and go, but you know what? I'm reclaiming my life from this, and
Yeah.
it's going to be about what I want to do, not what OCD dictates I'm capable of doing or not. And I love
Yeah.
that.
And my goal is to be an OCD specialist because learning the stats of 13 to 17 years from the onset of symptoms to diagnosis and treatment for something that is so treatable,
Yeah.
like that's abysmal to me.
It
That's
is abysmal.
for me, like that's what I'm about now is I am wanting to specialize in OCD. I'm wanting to increase awareness, increase access. And I know my coworkers are so supportive of me. They're excited to have me there. They want to learn from me.
That's perfect. Open stance.
And
That's what we
that's
need.
and that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful to be surrounded by professionals who want to learn more and to do better. So I'm so fortunate in that way to be in this environment.
I love that. I love that. That's a beautiful thing. And the ripple effect, sometimes we'll never know the ripple effect of the work that we do, but particularly knowing how some of the more commonly diagnosed times of when OCD shows up for people is in childhood and is in that emerging adolescence into adulthood. So you're working with a population that no matter what they're coming in and grappling with, getting tools, getting resources now can change the trajectory of their lives in such a
Yes.
profound way. And it can happen later, like it did for you. You were like, once I got these tools and once I started kind of working through it and learning this, I got to reclaim my life. But it's such a powerful thing when you know, like, I get to be a piece of that hope planter and,
Mm,
may have people come back to us and do sometimes in the future and go, you know what, this made such a life-saving difference for me. But
mm,
for others, just knowing that we can be part of the planters of hope is pretty
yeah,
special. So just as you are doing in your work, Ashton, just coming and sharing your story with the fam today is such a profound gift. And so I thank you so much for that. Also, I'll mention some of the resources again that you mentioned. I'm going to have linked over on this episode's blog. So you talk about No CD, which is available in all 50 states, in certain other countries. And as I've talked with Patrick McGrath about, if you have interest in learning more about No CD and you don't know if you're serviced, he's always encouraged people just to reach out because there may be still some resources they can link you with. Can I ask you to that effect too, Ashton? Did you use the
yeah,
online community within the No CD app? Was that a resource that you
yeah.
found helpful?
Yeah, I was able to use that. I was able to do, and I actually still do attend their online support groups
I love that.
through an OCD. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to say whether you are getting therapy through NoCD or not, you can download the app. They do have different kind of exposure tools
Hmm.
built within the app, but they also will just sometimes do Q&As and live streams. They have the community aspects, so that is a beautiful resource via NoCD. It is based in exposure and response prevention therapy, which is one of the evidence-based treatments for OCD. Also, Ashton mentioned OCD training school. So Ashton was also one of our episode winners of ICBT course. So he was referencing that, but ICBT, otherwise known as inference-based CBT. If you're a clinician wanting to learn more, there are a ton of training resources, but there is also a self-help resource. If you are a person with lived experience or maybe a mom, dad, partner that is like, I don't understand this very well and would love to learn more, that is a phenomenal resource. OCD Training School has done an amazing job. And as you may have heard, if you've been listening to the show lately, I am now an affiliate for OCD Training School. So if you want to learn more about that and support the podcast at no extra cost, you can head on over to my page, ocdfamilypodcast.com/courses, and you can check out any of the courses OCD Training School offers. And when you buy or purchase through that link, it supports the fam. So feel free to check that out if you're interested in learning more. But Ashton, as we close, any final thoughts that you want to share with the fam here? This has been such a profound gift, as I said, and would love to give
Yeah.
you any final thoughts if you have any.
Yeah. Just honestly, this has been a great conversation, like you said, and just grateful to be here. Like gratitude for this opportunity and to be able to speak the truth. And it's a reminder that I've come such a long way in my journey to be able to speak something that I know will be out there in public, even if just one person is able to hear my story, see parts of themselves in it, and benefit, then that is it. That is wonderful. It fills my heart with joy.
Well, I can guarantee one person is impacted by it because I'm moved and impacted by it at the
Oh,
very least. I am so incredibly grateful for it. It's so intentionally placed here within OCD Awareness Month because your story is impacting others. Trust that one. You've definitely met that one because I'm here and just so appreciative. So thank you again, Ashton. I look forward to our continued friendship and I look forward to continuing to cheer you on and see the amazing work that you're doing. And you sharing your story is already amazing. But well done, sir. Thank you so much for hanging out with the fam today.
thanks, Nicole. Great to be here.
Intrusive Thoughts. All right. Okay. Another big, huge thanks to this Mr. Pizza for hanging with the fam and telling their powerful story. And as if Ashton hasn't been generous enough with their time, he sent me over a list of really helpful resources that I'm going to post over on this episode's blog at ocdfamilypodcast.com. And he included something for everyone that may have connected with pieces of their story. So if you're facing cancer or haven't yet, but face incredibly scary odds like our BRCA fam, if you're interested in learning more about unmasking or even DBT skills created specifically for neurodivergent folks, stories about trauma or difficulties in that parent-child relationship, no CD, you name it, fam. Come check this episode's blog out. And then in closing, here in the Intrusive Thought segment, which is my application segment of the show for the newer fam in town, I'm going to ask that we all follow Ashton's lead and find at least one person, a saved person, and share our stories with them. Because stories connect. Stories are relatable. Stories are validating. Stories are normalizing. And these stories, our lived experience stories, can plant seeds of hope for so many others. So whether you decide to do an Instagram Live or tell your family member about your experience with OCD, find your safe person and share it. And remember, you don't have to be the direct warrior living with OCD. You can be the mother or daughter, sister, brother. You can be a godfather or uncle, the partner or best friend. No matter who you are, your story matters. Our stories matter. And on the eve of OCD Awareness Week kicking off, here during OCD Awareness Month, let us not forget, there is so much more that unites us than divides us. We are family, and we are better together. Thank you for joining me and our OCD family community. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please like and subscribe to the OCD Family Podcast wherever you enjoy your podcasts. Did you find this content helpful? Please consider leaving a review. The more people that know they're not alone, the better. For more information regarding today's podcast, please visit OCDFamilyPodcast.com and remember to join the email list while you're there. It will provide you with the most up-to-date information, resources, and the down low on the family chatter. Oh yeah, nothing says family like Ashton and me exposing OCD. That's right, I went there. And you can too at OCDFamilyPodcast.com.